seeing that through to the end, if indeed you did. The concept I'd like to introduce is, add to the previous video, is neurotransmitter location on the Earth. Where's the focal point for the neurotransmitter potential historically? Is there a cutout of a certain piece of land, a certain island, a certain continent, country, nation, whatever, that has symbolically or otherwise produced this level of neurotransmission, not as an active force, but as a historical element, that it has existed, it did exist, and it will exist in history, the neurotransmitter. Hence the static concept of a neurotransmitter island or location as an object, a piece of something, rather than an active force, even though on another level it could still have an active potential. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to cover the ground again relating to the idea of skills. I will clarify that concept. So if a person tries to draw multiple images and continues to draw many images aesthetically, eventually they will realise that they cannot progress further, because the images will settle to a point in their mind when there is no incentive to continue producing the image. This is obviously an aesthetic limitation. It also relates to the shape of the Earth, the curvature of such and such, and the formation of planets, and so on and so forth. This means that to approach the subject of historical revisionism, we would have to look into the concept of aesthetic limitations and skill sets. Another example is that if you take a verb such as punching, running, those kind of verbs, you realise that they have they run out over the course of time. I think ephemeral is the word, or transient maybe. I'm not entirely sure, but these verbs disappear or maybe dissipate over time. They bridge a gap in history and in time, a simple verb, a simple doing word. So what we have there is a skill that becomes extinct through time in a certain respect. And so that will again relate to the idea that I will introduce in probably the next video about video games in different nations and races and states and so on. The next point I would like to talk about is the idea of looking at different sources and questioning these sources of these sources in our reality, such as technology, bacteria, viruses, organisms, that kind of thing. So if history isn't as it seems, one of the first things we would have to do is address the point that maybe an organism is not an organism and a machine is not a machine, or maybe the two could be swapped around. And that also relates to methods of reproduction, because a machine or an organism may reproduce asexually, and a human obviously may reproduce in the opposite manner. So that relates to an idea about certain gene pools, and the fact that if you take the hierarchies and the nobility classes of different nations, take the concept of okay, I'm not going to use the word, but limited breeding selection, and apply that to human beings and say, well, perhaps we could take on different breeding patterns, such as hypothetical selection, selecting faces hypothetically, almost as if choosing royal mates, for example, that kind of thing. So there's one face, another face, another face. Some of them may be royals, or they may be people in history that we're not aware of them being people in history, but we may select them anyway, and that may be factored in statistically to our choices. So that would relate to the difference between, say, an asexual reproduction in, say, bacteria compared to human reproduction. and we would say that the human reproductive method doesn't have an instantaneous breeding mechanism like bacteria, or method, shall we say. It chooses, it selects the people in the future on that level, but a bacterium works on a different level. And so, could these roles be reversed in any way? Could they be aided in any way? Could they be re-engineered to do with family lines, families, and those kinds of concepts? Also, due to the inherent interest that I have in preventing indigenous, not that I am currently actively pursuing this, but I'm trying to promote the concept perhaps, is preventing the disappearance of indigenous cultures. So the thing is that it is said that, say, Japan is a very useful place to assert the scientific position regarding the aging population. The government there believes that they can use that as, I would say, a novelty to promote their own endeavours for their own economic benefits and scientific benefits, presumably. Time and history tends to warp our perceptions if it is not entirely clear what historical elements are actually true and which aren't. And so the role of old people and young people in another respect could be reversed in certain ways. Is it not possible that the economy is straining itself and we actually do need to make a clearing for the ageing population? In relation to the first idea about drawing out the islands, which the pouches, which I called it, and also that relates to the neurotransmitter concept, because it's looking for a sensible neurotransmitter and aesthetic for the future that's clear and visible and not too competitive. So could these old people from that country, from Japan or other aging populations, be put in certain areas of conservation, of interest for conservation, as wise leaders? That kind of thing. I think probably some level of internationalism will benefit the ageing populations of the Earth. It just requires us to make a clearing for all of these economic concepts. The next part to do with historical revisionism is the role of certain empires in the history of the human race. So there may be the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Japanese Empire, the Mongol Empire, those kinds of empires, which are almost subsets of some of the more iconic, not that those aren't iconic, but the more materially rooted empires. So we could say, isn't it interesting that even though these empires have had a deep historical and cultural impact on us, on a material level, on a materialistic level, relating to materialism, the pervasive element, the continuing influence of these bygone empires is not entirely a characteristic of modern day life or our understanding of what's going on. Obviously that statement isn't entirely 100% factual, true, but it does get the point across that there isn't a constant current, if you like, of the influence. It's simply there in the background, maybe in our minds or in our activities. You know, it is as significant as a piece of pottery, for example. So that's what I'm getting at. So if we could take the histories of certain empires, find out what subsets of other empires symbolically or emblematically, if that's a word, that they relate to, how they relate to these empires and races. Why it is that certain empires have had staked out their own time frame that exists almost like a midpoint, a pathway through a midway through our minds. So this could relate to looking at the technological aspects of where society could be heading based on the empires of the past. So that's the other concept. And the final concept relates to the blue ocean strategy, and I will talk about that in another video.